Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the Spinetinglers book series, and it's book number 26, Wear and Scare. This is the only Halloween book in the Spinetinglers series. For those of you that have been watching my videos on this series that I've been reviewing, this is the only Halloween story that I know of in the series. And I have to say, I was pretty impressed by this. The series, kind of preface this, is a 30-book series written by a pen name author called M.T. Coffin, but it's actually like a surname used for ghostwriters to come and contribute to the series without having to change the author on the cover each and every time. This specific one was written by Kathleen Dewey, who, if you watch my last video on my review on Your Turn to Scream, I basically laid that book to pieces and said that's one of the worst kids' horror books I've ever read. But I mean this in much respect, even though it's kind of hit or miss for me with Kathleen Dewey's writing, this was something I really appreciated. It definitely captured the atmosphere of Halloween very well. There was some heartfelt moments in the story. There's events in the story that I didn't actually see coming, so she managed to subvert my expectations with the twist reveal and all of that near the end. I wasn't the most impressed in the series I've read so far. This is not my favorite, but it's definitely one of the more solid ones I've read, I have to say. So let me get into the plot of review without giving too much away. So this kid named Sammy and his friends are part of this Halloween committee at their elementary school. And this year, Sammy and his friends get this idea to do something bigger and spectacular that will make them, give the community a Halloween to remember, and they'll talk about it till the holidays, like around Christmas and stuff. They want to do something extra special this year, just because, they're getting kind of old. They're going to be out of the elementary school. They're going to be in middle school before you know it. They want to give one last send-off to the community who seems to be really involved in Halloween. This stems to Sammy's mom and her sister, Sammy's Aunt Emma, who, off the bat, I'm going to say Aunt Emma has to be one of my favorite adult characters in kids' horror I think I've ever read. I love her enthusiasm about Halloween. I love even Sam's mom to an extent, that they both are very, tradition-based when it comes to Halloween, and they appreciate the tradition of making a haunted house attraction for their community, especially at the elementary school. And off the bat, Sam is a very backable protagonist. I was really invested in what Sam wanted to do. And Sam and his friends, of course, come up with this idea that may or may not happen. And Sam has this anxiety about asking his aunt for this favor, but him and his friends come up with this idea that they might want to use his aunt's house for a haunted house attraction. But knowing that there's not a guarantee in that, he just wants to go about doing the other things involved with setting up with the haunted house, trying to find things that fit into the budget, and that includes the costumes that they have to wear, which is the first thing he wants to tackle. So he asks his mom to take him to a costume shop so they can shop around some costumes, and they're driving throughout the city, and they notice this Halloween shop kind of tucked in the alleyway called Wear and Scare. It might have like the shop owner's name in front of it. I forget the full details, but I know it's Wear and Scare. So they pull into this shop, and nobody's really around. They go to the door. They don't see anybody in there, and they walk in. When they walk in, they see this room full of costumes, and they're greeted by this creepy guy named Mr. Slithern. Now, Mr. Slithern is a very eerie character. He sets up a lot of mystery to the story. And if you read the story, you'll understand that he's not outright terrifying, but he's disturbing enough and unnerving enough to make you feel unsettled in the scenes that he's in. And it keeps you on your toes throughout the read, which I really appreciate. And it starts with this scene onward, basically. But Mr. Slithern said, yeah, go ahead and look around the shop. And then he overhears Sammy saying that he wants to pick the perfect costumes to wow the people that are going to come to the event. and he takes him to this back room with all these special costumes, and the light's very dim, light's not really shining on him very well. His mom and him are going through these costumes, and his mom is very impressed with these costumes, and they pick out a costume for Sammy that might look cool, and Sammy tries to go and find where to try on the costume, and he has a couple of interactions with Mr. Slytherin that's pretty creepy, not gonna lie. But he ends up in the dressing room. The dressing room has no mirror. It's like a sink with like dried candle wax on it. It's very eerie. But he puts on the costume, and his costume's a skeleton costume, right? And he said the bones look so real that he thought that was his actual skeleton. And he puts it on and he walks out and shows his mom. His mom gets him into the light, and they're like, "This is amazing." And he looks in the mirror, and he's like, "Oh, this is awesome. Costumes like these, if we can get enough of these for my friends and, Aunt Emma and Mom, Sammy's thinking to himself that we can do something really special here." But of course, the costumes end up being too expensive, too rich for Sammy's taste. They don't want to purchase the costumes, they want to rent them, but the rental price per costume is just out of the budget. So Sammy's mom is trying to barter with Mr. Slytherin, and Mr. Slytherin basically says, "I'll think about it," kind of, but, price is as it stands. So Sammy and his mom feel kind of disappointed, and, Sammy retreats back to, tell his friends, like, "Oh, we found these costumes, and, they're a little too expensive in the budget, but hopefully we can convince Mr. Slytherin to let us rent them for a cheaper price, because it's free advertising and whatnot," like his mom brought up. And this is where he finally gets up the courage. He has a meeting with the committee, and they go visit Aunt Emma's house, and he basically asks Aunt Emma if she's cool with using the house for the haunted house attraction, and she is pretty delighted. She goes, "Yeah, well, we can make, fake blood. We can, I think it's like blood soup and this blue goop, and put cobwebs everywhere." It's super atmospheric, and I really love Aunt Emma for that, for being so enthusiastic with these kids. Because if I was a parental figure or something, even in real life, I would totally be on board with something like this. So I really resonated with Aunt Emma in that moment, and really got me behind her character. So eventually, after they convinced Aunt Emma for the haunted house, the next step was to get the costumes. The costumes were now definitely an important factor to this experience. So Aunt Emma then gets involved, and they go back to Slytherin's wear and scare shop, and it seems like the place is deserted. But then Slytherin randomly comes out from behind the counter. He goes, "Oh, you startled me," kind of thing. And this time they have the whole committee. Like, Sammy's friends are now with him, and they go into the back room without Mr. Slytherin's permission. And he's at first mad, but then he's like, "Okay, whatever." And they split up in groups, and they go try on these costumes. Like, his friend tries on a vampire costume, then there's a Grim Reaper, and there's a mummy. And he of course has already tried the skeleton costume. And they all wear these costumes, and they look real, and they look great, and they're like, "We have to have these." So then it comes to a point where they're trying to barter with Mr. Slytherin, and Sam basically had enough, and he speaks up, and he's like, "Well, we can, why can't you give us a discount and stuff?" And then Mr. Slytherin basically says, "You know what? I'll give you them for free, but there's a catch." So everybody comes in the room, and then Mr. Slytherin explains, "I want to be there at the haunted house. You can rent the costumes for free, but I want to, hand out these cards." That's his only request, because it's free advertising. He wants advertisement to his business. Of course, his aunt agrees, but there's a stipulation that he's like, "I might need a ride. I need you to come give me a ride." A complete stranger, mind you. And they're like, "Nah, I can't do that, but thanks for the costumes." So they take the costumes and run, and Mr. Slytherin has to find a way to get to the house before the people start coming in. And they set up the haunted house, and they make it look really good. It feels really creepy. Comes to the night of the haunted house attraction at Aunt Emma's house, and there's groups of people forming outside, but Mr. Slytherin hasn't showed up yet. And the kids, part of the stipulation in the agreement was that the kids have to wear the costumes and they can't take them off. Well, they start noticing off the bat that these costumes look a little too real, and Sammy starts having these visions and stuff about the costume, and like he thinks he can see through his wrist and he thinks he can see through his hand, but it just looks like apparitions. And Mr. Slytherin still hasn't shown up yet until they're about to start the first group, and then he's in the first group and he starts handing out these cards. And this is where Mr. Slytherin gets kind of funny. It's almost like comedic relief. See, the kids have to take groups of people at group of people here, take them to this certain point, then they can let the next group in, kind of thing. And then Mr. Slytherin has posted up on the porch to give people the cards, and he's like very anal about it all. He's like, no, you have to hang on the card. You cannot drop the card. You cannot lose the card. You have to hang on to it. So the story kind of goes, as planned, until Sammy talks with his friend that's dressed up like the Grim Reaper, and she kind of explains to him that her plastic scythe to her costume is turned to real sharp metal, and he touches it and he's like, oh, that is real. And there's this really creepy scene that happens where he like shuts his finger into a doorway and he has to pop his like bony finger back into place. It's so like so descriptive and very creepy at the same time. And he has to go find his friend at one point, and his friend looks like he's been like drinking real blood, the guy with the vampire. The mummy's starting to look bigger and bulkier. The screech from the Grim Reaper is starting to get more and more realistic as the night goes on. And then it comes to the last group. They're finishing up the last group, and they wrap up the haunted house attraction, and they go to talk to each other. And then Mr. Slytherin seems to be the topic of interest with the kids. So like, we got to go find Mr. Slytherin. And come to find out that they all have these same exact identical cards that Mr. Slytherin was given out to the audience. And there comes an event where, he sees his aunt and his mom don't even look like themselves anymore, and they're also acting crazy and, mischievous and stuff, looking for Mr. Slytherin. And they're holding cards. So he immediately throws his card to the side, and he goes out to the backyard, and pretty much every person that was at the haunted house attraction has gathered up in the backyard. Same thing with his mom and his aunt and his friends who have worn the costumes, all holding their cards. And he notices that Mr. Slytherin is gathering them all up to do something. Now, this is where I can easily spoil the book here, but I'm going to kind of treat it like something happens with Mr. Slytherin. There's a big revelation about what his intentions are. There's this really wild thing that happens, and Sammy has to basically stop Mr. Slytherin from what he's planning to do. And he may or may not succeed at that. And then, of course, when the situation seems resolved, everybody gathers up and they try to go back to Mr. Slytherin's shop to see if may or may not he turned back up there. And when they go to the shop, they discover a vacant building that looks like nothing has been there for a while. Nothing was there. Everything was just covered in dust and everything. Kind of residual, kind of deals with the end of the story. I'm not going to spoil as well. And they get back in the car and they just drive away, and that's how the story ends. So that basically in a nutshell is Wear and Scare. Off the bat, I have to say, things I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed Sammy. He was a very backable protagonist. The premise of this story was excellent. I like setting up a haunted house attraction for Halloween. Very reminiscent to things I would have done as a kid. I would have gone to my elementary school and did the Halloween party kind of stuff where they have the haunted house, the dance, like playing Monster Mash and all those songs. Very, very nostalgic feeling book. Very home-hitting on the atmosphere. Like I said, the heartfelt nature and just the beautiful relationship Aunt Emma has with her niece. Her nephew. My bad. Her nephew is very touching. It's very touching. Aunt Emma, like I said, is one of my favorite characters. Every character in this book is likable. Mr. Slytherin, as a villain, he's kind of a villain. I think he is the villain, if you think about it. But Mr. Slytherin as a character brings this really unnerving tension to the story. something feels off, and you understand that, but you can't quite put your finger on what he's planning to do. And trust me, you're not going to see what happens until the end. I mean, you can kind of see it coming, maybe with the card thing, with the whole gathering and whatnot, but you're definitely not going to see what the plan is. Trust me. But he's very creepy. Very well done. But I do have a slight drawback with this book, and it's not the heftiest drawback, but it is a drawback here. And that is the pace to this book. It drags a little bit. And it kind of drags too much. This is one of the shorter books. I think it's like less than 120 pages, I feel. It definitely felt like that. But it's very reminiscent to problems like books like Attack of the Jack-O-Lanterns has, where there's just a lot of filler to get through, to get to the good stuff near the end. I feel like a lot of the scenes were kind of over-explained and over-set up. Like, they'll be in a house and they'll spend like 10 to 11 pages talking dialogue and what's going on through the house with the characters and the planes and whatnot. There's a lot of focus on building scenes in that way, which I don't know if I'm a big fan of. I feel like this could have been trimmed down maybe considerably, or maybe they could have used the page space to do a little bit more fake out scares or something, kind of keeping the book kind of spritzy with, you know, Mr. Slither. Maybe have Mr. Slither like spying on them through a window or something while they're talking. Dewey could have added something like that in the first part and the middle part of this book, but she chose not to do that, and it just shows with the scenes. If I had to summarize it, the scenes just feel like they drag too long in a nutshell. So from a 0 to 5 stars, like I said, with those problems with the drawn out scenes and just filling up page space of the story, I deducted like 0.4 off. So I gave this a 4.6 out of 5, which is still an A. I still love this book. I like the twists and turns, especially near the end. This book managed to subvert my expectations very well. The ending it wasn't like the greatest ending ever. It was kind of something like, oh, they're kind of expected to do this, but it worked, and it was a fitting end to the story, I feel. Love the characters. Can't really complain. This is definitely a really solid Spinetinglers book. So yeah, that's basically Wear and Scare. Let me know in the comments section if you have read this book. Did you love this or did you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.